And a very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Issues and Attitudes. My name is Jeff Owens, Interim General Manager at WEIU. My co-host is Annalisa Haynes.
How's it going, everyone?
Good. And making his first appearance here at WEIU, brand new at EIU Vice President of University Advancement. Did I get that right?
Yes.
All right. Dr. Ken Wetstein.
Hello, and actually it's pronounced Wetstein, but...
See, I asked Wanda Kay, I said, I don't want to mess that up. She goes, oh, it's Wetstein.
No, I answer to both, but good afternoon, everybody.
Well, I apologize, Dr. Wetstein.
No problem.
So I'm not going to yell at Wanda Kay, but I'm going to say I will just to make myself feel better.
Sure.
Yeah, I wonder if she's still under the bus you threw her under.
Yeah.
But that's, she'll be fine.
She'll be fine. She's tough. She's a great lady. Well, I know you just started, just a few, but what, July 1st? Or
July 15th?
July 15th, yeah. So just give us your overall thoughts right now of VIU and coming back to your alma mater.
Oh, I'm so excited to be back. I had an amazing undergraduate experience. I got my bachelor's in political science in '91 and stayed in the Res Life program and was a hall director and got my master's in counseling in '93. And I have had a long career in higher ed and in working in different nonprofit settings, but the experience I had at Eastern prepared me for that professional life and got me to where I am today. So to be back in this role where I'm helping to attract financial support to the university, it feels amazing, and it couldn't be a better time to be here because of the great momentum on campus with enrollment growing and the feel of the campus. In fact, I remarked to a colleague who was a contemporary of mine during my time as an undergrad. He asked me, how's it going at campus? I said, I can tell you it feels exactly the way it felt when we were students. That supportive environment, that caring attitude, the attention to the students, that kind of the DNA of EIU hasn't changed one bit in the 27 or 30 years since I was here.
You can tell the difference just from like 4 or 5 years ago to today. It's an amazing difference. It's almost palpable. So when you get in and start doing your job so far, what have you kind of learned about Eastern that, I don't know, maybe surprised you or didn't surprise you, but just, what you've learned after you've come back these past couple of months?
Well, for me, it's taking this new profession that I'm in of fundraising and of development work, and I say new. I've been in the development world for about 5 years, but I had a long career in student affairs, and so there's all these new lessons I've learned in this new profession, but now applying those lessons in the context of a state-supported regional, small university. That's where all of my learning curve has been for the first 2 months, and I assume will be a part of my learning curve going forward for the next 18 months at least. So it's thinking about, structurally applying those lessons I learned in private higher ed and in performance nonprofit groups and raising money in those settings. How does that apply now in this particular venue? What helps is having a really experienced and knowledgeable and committed staff that are already in place. And so a lot of the things I've had to learn along the way, I have great team members who are already filling me in. Okay, this is how we work that. And so a lot of it's translation. Okay, this is what an annual fund look like in this context. What does the annual fund look like here? And what do major campaigns? What's the size of what we would call a major gift, and how all those moving parts work? But that continues to be my focus is on that learning curve. But ultimately, Jeff, it's all about more. How do we get more people to give more to EIU more often? Yep. And so that becomes the major theme that I'm pursuing in the role.
Well, the staff buy-in, I thought was probably was that your first hurdle? I hate to say hurdle because it sounds bad, but getting them to buy in under a new management, is that tough?
Actually, no, that's been quite easy. I think, there's essentially 3 departments or divisions that work together as part of that advancement team.
Yeah.
So you've got the alumni affairs group, you've got the development group, and you have the foundation component. And those 3 groups have been collaborating very well in the absence of a vice president for many years now. It's been nearly 3 years, I think, since there was a defined single leader of that advancement function. And in the absence of that, there were 3 pro staff who stepped up and were kind of co-leading as a team. And those 3 leaders are still in place in my organization, and I'm so lucky to have John McKenzie and Mike Murray and Steve Rich in their various roles and still in place, and they've been extremely supportive. So the transition to there's a new vice president and how does all that work, that's gone smooth. I couldn't ask for more in terms of the staff reinforcing my role and helping me be successful. It's gone incredibly well.
Okay. And Lisa?
So For those people who don't understand what university advancement means, what are some of those responsibilities that you have? I know you mentioned fundraising. That's something that we're actually quite familiar with. But what type of fundraising? Are there different levels, or where does the money go, and so on and so forth?
Sure. So one way to think about what I would call a comprehensive development program is that you would have all of these. I'm going to identify some of the components of a comprehensive plan. One would be a robust annual fund, and when I say annual fund, I mean renewable giving that happens each year that is typically solicited through either bulk mailing platforms or through what we call telefunding, making phone calls to alumni and friends of the university to seek recurring gifts. And so every comprehensive development program needs to have a robust and functioning and efficient annual fund. And the kinds of lessons you learn and the kinds of techniques you apply in that are different than, say, the next component, a major gifts program. Mm-hmm. And a major gifts program is where you're identifying and then cultivating and eventually soliciting donors and supporters for specifically identified projects that have a larger price tag. So you may think of we need this item built, or this room sponsored, or this scholarship underwritten, and it could be $10,000 or $25,000 or $200,000. That would fall in the major gifts category. And so to be a good, effective development operation, you need to have a steady roster of major gifts that you're pursuing and donors that align in terms of their interest in Eastern Illinois University and their capacity to give, who could connect to those opportunities. And then what we'll work on as we go forward is making sure we have that inspiring message that moves those donors to make those gifts. So then a third major component of a development operation is what we would call planned giving. And that is it's a subspecies of major gifts, but these are major gifts that are tied to the testamentary intentions of donors, the way that donors think about their legacy. So they make gifts connected to their wills, or to life insurance, or to their existing retirement accounts. And so it's not a gift necessarily that Eastern Illinois is going to realize today, but it's planting that seed for the donor to think about something significant that they could do for the university.
Absolutely. As
a part of what they do with their overall estate planning. So planned giving is another area that you want to have in a robust development operation. You need to have some planned giving activity going on. And a lot of times your other two categories, your annual fund donors and your major gift donors, they tend to reveal themselves as planned giving prospects over time, because they've shown you with their commitment, with their frequency of giving, with the kinds of things they've given to, they've told you with all of their behaviors that they might consider doing a gift in that very special way.
At what
That's
point in
awesome.
the process, sorry to interrupt you, do you hint at the planned giving, or is it just, do you know that somebody's given 12 times over 20 years and it's time to ask them?
There is some formulas to it, Jeff. There is some math involved. There can be.
Or darn it, there's math.
In terms of, there's an art and a science. And the science part of it is assessing those variables that suggest to you someone is a stronger candidate for planned giving. So we look at things like consecutive years giving in an annual fund setting. We'll look at consecutive years of giving in an annual fund setting, and the gift is increasing over time. You know, if they started out as a $50 donor, then they're a $100 donor, then they're a $500 donor. These are behaviors that suggest to you there's a real connection and a loyalty. And sometimes when we talk to a planned giving prospect, we'll frame it that way. We'll say, you know, you've been giving $500 a year, every year, to support this program or this scholarship or this activity. When you leave, when you pass away, that $500 goes away. Would you consider including $10,000 in your will to replace that $500 a year forever and ever, so that money never goes away? So there's a little bit of that math to it. And sometimes that's the science. The art is those human relation skills that we hone as development officers, that as we're building a relationship with a prospect or a donor, we begin to learn, or they tell us, or they show us through their other nonverbals that they're ready to talk about something like that. Sometimes, when it's really going well, they tell you before it ever occurs to you.
That's the best feeling, right?
Sure. Well, and then there's the ones where there's a planned gift that we never know about, and we never learn about that gift until a donor has passed away, and then we're surprised by it. Those are pleasant surprises, but I always regret that we missed out on some stewardship, because we could have been having a dialogue with that donor along the way.
And just to be able to look him in the eye and say thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I get that.
And more importantly, there's the donor intent. Tell us what you want to achieve for Eastern with that gift. And some of them are great at detailing that in their will or in other gift agreements, but sometimes it's one sentence in their will, and now we have to interpret what they really hope to accomplish with the dollars.
That would be, So I get
So that's missed out. Now, I left out one last piece of a robust development operation, and that's grants. In the way that Eastern is structured, my department, we don't worry much about grants. There's a handful of grants that we work with, but the vast majority of grants are actually pursued and administered by another office on campus called Sponsored Programs. And that's because the vast majority of grants that Eastern receives are grants that are through federal or state monies that are connected to the academic enterprise. So it's there's some real specialization that has to happen in how those grants are written and how those grants are administered, and so the vast majority of those flow through those professionals.
And there's about 9,000 pages of paperwork to those, so that might be a good thing.
Yeah, having worked with grants in other contexts, I don't necessarily lament that they're not in my bailiwick.
I understand. You graduated Eastern, obviously, in the early 90s. Did you have a goal to come back, or was it in the back of your mind, or was it one of those things you're on your career and didn't want to look back, or how'd that work?
Well, I had always paid attention from afar. Eastern's the kind of place that leaves its mark on you.
Oh, yeah.
And then I've had colleagues that I worked with back when I was a graduate student who have stayed involved at Eastern as employees, and so that's been a social connection to understand how things were going. And but to be honest with you, Jeff, until this opportunity presented itself last spring when the search was happening, which I stumbled into accidentally through one of those personal connections. I was not looking for a job, but had a close relationship with someone who said, you ought to think about applying for that. And so to be back now, I constantly ask to be pinched because it's my dream job, and it's at the place that means so much to me. So it's really special to be back. But I hadn't been plotting some return along the way.
Earlier we mentioned that we have gone a couple years without a vice president of university advancement. So with that in mind, what kind of feeling do you get knowing that, wow, that there's a lot on your shoulders is what it seems like, or am I wrong to assume that?
No, I think you're exactly right, that there are now expectations, and this is a position that is well compensated, and because of that ought to be moving the needle on fundraising results. And the president and I have talked about that a great deal, and it's impossible for me to be in a meeting anywhere on campus, whether it's with faculty colleagues or with other members of the President's Council, or if it's talking to a line faculty member or a staff member or students, where I'm not constantly reminded that we need to do more. We need to bring in more, because those dollars that we can attract from donors immediately make an impact on campus. I just came from a President's Council meeting where we were excited by the difference that $50,000 made last year in terms of scholarships. That it was a scholarship program called the Panther Retention Scholarship, and the entire intent of this scholarship was to identify those freshmen who were about to make that transition to sophomore year, but for the fact that they were carrying some balance with the business office, that was an obstacle to them re-enrolling as a sophomore. We found philanthropic dollars. This happened before I arrived, but they found philanthropic dollars that they could apply with an investment of $50,000. They are able to target $51,000 scholarships to freshmen. And of the 50 that they approached with this opportunity, 45 retained and are back at Eastern for their sophomore year.
That's fantastic news.
Exactly.
I didn't know
And
that they
so
did that.
I come out of that meeting today and I'm thinking, how can we make that $150,000 for this year? Because what we know is financial challenges are one of the biggest threats to a student being able to stay on and continue. And Eastern's culture is one of, we want to get every student across the finish line if we can. And if that's the biggest obstacle, I think there's donors out there that are inspired because a lot of our alums have that same story in their own narrative. That summer where somebody had to sell the family car, or somebody had to take an extra job, or somebody had to make a particular sacrifice, or there wasn't a vacation that happened so that their son or daughter could make it for that sophomore year to close that balance. So I think we have alumni who totally get that phenomenon.
And that's an easy story to kind of sell
Absolutely.
because it's so right to the heart. And you could say, hey, we did 45 this year, our goal is to do 100 next year. I think that would make sense in the selling aspect. And that leads me into the next question. Let's say you're getting ready to meet with somebody you've never met before, brand new. It could be a prospective donor or even a donor that, that was at Eastern before you got here, Dr. Wetstein. And how do you plan for that? That's the kind of stuff I love to hear. How do you plan for that meeting?
Well, particularly when it's an initial contact like that, one of the things I'm usually pretty upfront with that prospect is I say, I'm coming to see you, let's get together, let's have lunch, let's have coffee, however we want to set that up. And by the way, I'm not coming to ask you for money. I'm coming to get to know you a little bit. I want to update you on how things are going at the campus, and I want to gain your perspective about your EIU experience. And so when I'm thinking about an initial contact meeting, I'm hoping for 2 or 3 big outcomes. I want to share with them the accomplishments of the campus and also the needs of the campus. What are the big things that are projects that are on the horizon where we need philanthropic support? I want to better understand what their connection, what their linkage to EIU is. What is their EIU story? Because that helps me later in the relationship to understand what kinds of initiatives might inspire them. If we get into conversations and we find out we both have a passion for marching band because I did that and they were in it or they love it or they thought it was a big deal, then all of a sudden the next time I talk with them, I'm thinking about the 2, 3, or 4 things I've learned from the music department about the band and what could move the needle with our marching music program. So I want to make sure they hear what's going on and what our needs are. I also want to hear what their EIU story is. And when those go well, you can sometimes learn from the donor what are the other things that have inspired their other philanthropy. That's one of the best questions you can ask a potential donor is, tell me about some of the things you're already passionate about that you support. And then you hear about the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, or you hear about their church, or you hear about that community program that they're very committed to, that they make gifts of time, talent, or treasure to. When you understand that about a donor, you also understand whether they're a good fit for something you have going on.
It's a good answer. Really
That
good
is.
answer. Now, do you get nervous asking for money ever?
I used to, but I'll tell you guys a metaphor that has helped me, because this is what people think about the development world from the outside, right? That let's take one of the most uncomfortable things to talk about, money, and then let's inject it into an artificial relationship. But here's the metaphor I use, and I talked about this during my candidacy, and I hope it helped. But I want the two of you to think about a lemonade stand. You see in the neighborhood, there's a couple kids, and they've got a lemonade stand set up right there by the street. Do you stop?
You want to every time.
I do.
Yeah.
I stop almost every time. And then you walk up and you see a little sign that says, lemonade, 50 cents. Do you give them 50 cents? I give them more. I give them $1. Sometimes I give them, if I don't have $1, I'll give them the 5. And at that moment, that young man or that young lady, they're over the moon because you just overpaid for their product and they're speechless with the joy that you just gave them. But what that young man doesn't know, or what that young lady doesn't know, is you're even happier for giving them the $1 or the $5 bill. That exchange, that's philanthropy. And so what we're doing in the fundraising world is we're trying to give donors the opportunity to have that $5 cup of lemonade experience. I'm telling you, when I leave that kid's driveway, he's happy, but he's not nearly as happy as I am. And I feel so good about having done it. When philanthropy is going well, that's exactly how it feels.
I'm going to use that tomorrow on our
Yeah,
Do you mind?
really?
Well, let me give you the postscript on that
Okay.
on that metaphor. So my second day of work here at Eastern, I'm pulling out of the street that my apartment is on, and two little kids have a lemonade stand set up. And so then I start looking around for candid camera, like, is somebody playing a joke on me? But those two kids got $5 out of my wallet that day, and I still have the styrofoam cup in my office.
That's awesome.
And I'm like, I think the universe was speaking to me
Yeah.
when I saw that lemonade stand.
That's really cool. I guess I
using that
never,
tomorrow.
yeah.
That story will be
So,
told tomorrow.
and part of going back to that metaphor is you can see the after effect, right? You can see on their faces they're
that's right.
excited. It doesn't matter what they use their money for, whether it's candy or whatever. You don't think about that. You just think about that feeling that you got by helping them because they look so happy. So how do you tell the donors, or how do you help the donors see that?
Yeah.
See that? Does that make sense, and help them feel that?
What you've described is what in our field we call stewardship. And so it's that act of demonstrating to the donor the impact of their gift. And that sometimes that's bringing them back to a luncheon so they can meet the student who received their scholarship. It might mean
That's cool.
inviting them there for the ribbon cutting for that new space that they made a gift that they invested in. We had a great experience of stewardship this weekend at the stadium, at O'Brien Stadium. We're working on what we call the Victory Suite. It's a special VIP space. It's just below the press box. It has it's a way to offer a special game day experience for key supporters and friends of the university. Well, that space is in need of a tune-up. It's ready for some renovation, and we've had a particular family that stepped up and made some significant gifts to support that. They've made major gifts, and so we were able to have a special day for them for the first home game this past Saturday, and that we didn't have our hands out at that meeting. We weren't, or at that event, we weren't asking for money. We were stewarding the gift that already happened to show them
That's
our
cool.
appreciation.
There you go. Now, I was reading this morning a little bit about donor attrition is hitting a lot of universities. How do we stop it at EIU so the donors continue to come in?
It's going to be an important variable for us going forward. You're right that the national trend, particularly in a stat that a lot of schools track called alumni giving, they track what's called an alumni giving rate. And essentially that's what percentage of your living alumni who you have good contact with, you have good contact information with, what percentage of them made a gift to the university in the past year? And so nationally we've seen those giving rates decline, and Eastern has experienced that same kind of decline. So for us right now, there's two facts that exist about Eastern's alumni that are in contradiction to each other. For one, the good fact, or the good stat, is that we have one of the highest alumni satisfaction rates of any state school in Illinois, heck, of any state regional university in the country. Another way to say that is it's really hard to find an EIU alumnus who's upset, who is angry about their experience. They tend to, they're like me, they just can't say enough good things about the time they had here. So we have that exists, and then we have a 3.5% alumni participation rate in giving to the university. And so I look at that as an excellent opportunity, because what we have is a lot of happy alumni who are sitting on the sidelines right now. And so the focus of my kind of vision planning for our unit as advancement is what projects, what initiatives, what campaigns can we identify and put out there in front of our alumni that will move them off the sidelines. And I think one of the ones is the one that I described earlier, which is finding ways to connect their giving directly to changing the student experience. So investing in student aid, investing in students being able to travel and have professional experiences with conferences. And so I think right now, we don't do a lot of our targeted fundraising with our alumni towards those kinds of things.
Match-up situations, yeah.
Sure. And I'll give you a great example, and I probably shouldn't admit this on the radio, considering the job that I'm in, but in the 27 years since I had left Eastern, and now I'm back, I made one gift to EIU. I had probably been asked more than 50 times, but almost every time I was asked, it was an annual fund effort, and it was aimed at my academic department, political science, where I got my bachelor's degree. Now, no offense to political science. I loved my experience there. I loved my professors. But that's not where I went into in my professional work. I went into student affairs, and then how I've moved over into development work. So I was never inspired to make a political science gift. The one gift I made was at a EIU housing reunion. And that's because housing was a big part of what shaped me when I was here, being an RA and being a hall director. And I bet if the marching band had ever asked me for money, I probably would have gave money to the marching band because I had such a transformative experience with that. And right now, most of our annual fund is focused in those academic asks. And I don't want that to go away. We have donors who give to that. But I also want to add some other appeals in there that deal with what we call affinity groups. Were you involved in Greek life? Were you involved in student publications? Were you involved in residence life leadership? Were you involved in marching band and other spirit band organizations? Were you involved in, just pick those different affinities. There are, I think, donors out there who would consider making a gift to those if they knew their gift was going to be directed towards those activities or items.
So if each, and I know we only have a couple minutes.
Yeah, you're all right.
If each department or program or whatever the case is, if they already have a strong alumni base, and if they're already collecting money, is it competing with university advancement if they're already getting funds or fundraising with their alums? Does that make sense?
No, you're
Okay.
right to think about it that way, but we include those activities because we're assisting them with those annual fund campaigns. And so they're sending direct mail letters, but they're sending them on behalf of an academic department. And so how we message that case for support is tied to that academic program. And then we follow up most of those with phone calls asking for gifts. But again, is asking them to make a gift to an academic department.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said competing like
No,
over the air. I didn't want it to come across as bad.
I don't want my affinity fundraising to interfere,
Right.
and that's why we'll always make sure that the academic asks is primary, and then. But I think there's opportunities then later in the year to circle back to our donor base and look at those people who are on the sidelines who've not made a gift, and see if they'll respond to a different appeal.
We used to have that issue on a large sales staff in commercial radio, and I said my answer sometimes was two's better than none.
Yes.
Two people asking is better than nobody remembering that client. So just a minute left. Anything that we forgot or anything you'd like to talk about in the last minute?
No, just I would continue to echo that enthusiasm. It's going to make our work and development that much easier because I think now our donor community is starting to hear all the good stories about what's happening at Eastern, and it's much easier to attract gifts to something that's winning than if they perceive that it's losing.
That's well said. And you said it right during the week of Adopt-A-Watt here at WEIU Radio. So
Give to WEIU, please.
it is a great week to give to WEIU. We'll be back on the air tomorrow morning from 6 to 11, asking the great folks of the Coles County area to give. Dr. Wetstein, I appreciate you coming in. It's been great to meet you these
Thanks
first couple
for having
months.
me.
And we'll be working together a lot in the future on some things. So again, thanks for everything you do for us. And again, officially, welcome back
Thanks
to
to both of you.
EIU.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And Lisa, have yourself a great day.
I'll
This
try.
is Hit Mix 88.9 WEIU. You're 13. Have a great day, everybody.